Welcome back to Reformed Thinking. For this deep dive, we're looking at a really pivotal period in the history of redemption.
We are. It's the whole era from David's anointing through Solomon's glory, and then,
Ah.
then the slide toward the Babylonian captivity.
And it seems like this is where providence changes tactics. It goes from this very broad selection of a nation to something much more focused.
That's a good way to put it. It's about anchoring three things that are, you could say, non-negotiable for the Messiah.
Okay, what are they?
First, his specific ancestral line. Second, the fixed physical location of worship. And third, the written blueprint of his mission, which comes through the prophets in incredible detail.
And what we're here to do is see how God engineered all of this, even using things like war and political decay to get it done.
Right.
So let's unpack that. The sources we have seem to signal a huge shift in focus. Before, the story was kind of held by the people of Israel in general. But now, the whole narrative just zooms in on one person, David. This is the elevation of the ancestor and type.
It's a massive expression of sovereign election in action. I mean, think about when Samuel goes to Jesse's house to anoint the next king.
He looks at the older sons.
He does. He sees Eliab and thinks, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. He's looking at stature, at appearance.
But God's response is immediate. He doesn't see as man sees.
No, he looks on the heart.
And the sources really go out of their way to point out how remarkable this choice was.
It was. David's the youngest, the one they didn't even call in from the fields.
He's out with the sheep. His father's household is described as little among the tribes. He's the least likely candidate you can imagine.
And that's the whole point. This choice consistently goes against what we'd expect.
It's a theme that runs through the whole history of redemption, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You see it from the very beginning. The choice of Seth over Cain, Noah above the whole drowned world.
Abraham chosen out of Ur.
And then even within Abraham's own family, these critical distinctions keep happening. Isaac, the son of promise, chosen over Ishmael.
And Jacob, the younger twin, over Esau.
The younger one, chosen over the physically stronger, the firstborn. It happens again in the next generation, too.
You mean with Pharez and Zara?
Yes. Zara puts his hand out first. He gets the scarlet thread. He seems to be the one marked for preeminence.
But Pharez is the one who breaks forth first.
He supplants him. All of this is designed to make one thing crystal clear. God's choice is free, it's sovereign, and it has nothing to do with the criteria the world uses.
Things like age or status or what someone looks like.
None of it.
So David's selection, coming from this low starting point, it leads to a distinction that is far greater than Saul's.
That's the critical difference. Saul was chosen as an individual.
But David was chosen dynastically.
Yes. Saul was elected to rule temporarily, mostly because the people wanted a king they could see, someone who looked the part. But David's anointing establishes the crown in his family forever.
So it's not just about setting up the temporal kingdom of Israel.
No, not at all. It's the mechanism for establishing the kingdom of the universal spiritual church, the one that lasts to the end of the world. He was planting the specific legal root for what Isaiah would later call the branch of righteousness.
And that connection between David's earthly throne and Christ's spiritual throne, that's where the real theological weight is.
It is. It's why David is called the greatest personal type of Christ in the Old Testament.
And there are different kinds of types. Right.
The sources lay out three categories. You have instituted types, like animal sacrifices. You have providential types, like the Exodus itself.
And then personal types.
Individuals whose lives foreshadow the Messiah. And David is at the very top of that list.
Why David over, say, Moses or Joshua?
Because of the way his roles converge directly onto Christ. He's a shepherd, a sufferer, a prophet, and, most critically, a king.
And Christ is called David in prophecy.
All the time. Ezekiel, for example, says, I will set up one shepherd over them, even my servant David. And of course, the New Testament constantly calls him the Son of David. It seals that link.
Their thrones are seen as one. Luke says God will give Christ the throne of his father David. That's not just a historical nod.
It's positional. The spiritual kingdom Christ rules is presented as the everlasting continuation of David's kingdom. So David's anointing wasn't just a political event. It was a divine act that established the visible form of the church's kingdom moving forward.
And the contrast in their physical appearance just deepens the whole thing. The sources point out that David was low of stature, maybe even despicable in appearance.
Right, while Saul was literally head and shoulders above everyone else.
That's a powerful visual metaphor.
It is, and it carries right into the gospel. Saul, who looked great and imposing, was the first temporary king. But the kingdom was taken from him by David, who looked small and insignificant.
Which perfectly prefigured Christ.
It did, because Christ, too, came in lowliness.
No form nor comeliness.
That's Isaiah 53. He appeared despicable, was rejected by men, he didn't have any of the outward pomp people expected from a king, and yet this humble figure took the kingdom from the great ones of the earth.
The established powers of the time.
God consistently uses what looks weak, what looks lowly, what's unexpected, to achieve his greatest ends.
And the fact that David was the youngest son just keeps hammering home that pattern. Human systems are constantly being subverted by God's choice.
It ensures the glory goes entirely to the one doing the choosing. It's a declaration that when the true son of David finally arrives, he won't be a man of pride, but a humble king.
So that high calling, that distinction, it immediately puts a massive target on David's back.
Of course.
If the line of promise now resides in him, then everything, both human and demonic, is going to seek his destruction.
Right, which leads us to the next massive theme, divine preservation of the precious seed.
And this isn't just a series of exciting stories. It's a necessary theological point.
It is. The work of redemption itself hung on David's survival. If David had been killed, the promise of the Messiah would have been, well, defeated. The visible church would have been snuffed out.
And David's life, from the moment of his anointing, was just one near-fatal danger after another. It starts even before Goliath.
It does, back when he's just a shepherd, the confrontation with the lion and the bear.
Which is heavy with typological meaning.
Incredibly so. Here's this young man, a stripling, who conquers these massive, fierce beasts. He miraculously rescues the lamb they had seized. This wasn't just a story about being brave.
So how does that map onto Christ?
It's a type of Christ rescuing souls from the roaring lion, Satan. David's victory over those literal devouring animals showed the kind of supernatural authority Christ would use to rescue his spiritual flock.
Then we get to the most famous one, David and Goliath. The giant is threatening to tear Israel apart.
And David steps forward armed with, what, a staff, a sling, and faith.
And the sources really focus on how he wins.
They do, because Christ, the antitype, slays the spiritual Goliath sin and death, not with earthly power, but through a totally counterintuitive weapon.
David uses Goliath's own sword to cut off his head.
He does, and the spiritual parallel is the cross. The cross was supposed to be the instrument of defeat, the enemy's weapon to destroy Christ.
But he uses that seeming defeat to win the victory.
He does. By submitting to it, Christ used Goliath's own sword, you could say, to deliver his people. It's the ultimate example of God using weakness to overthrow strength.
But the threats didn't end with wild animals or giants. They got political. King Saul.
Right. His jealousy and hatred became a sustained, systematic campaign to destroy David.
And his schemes were relentless.
He tries to get David killed by the Philistines, demanding that dangerous dowry. When that fails, he just gives a direct order to his own son, Jonathan, to kill David.
And here's where Providence intervenes in a really interesting way. Through Jonathan's loyalty.
It's a key detail.
Yeah.
Jonathan is the crown prince. David is his direct rival for the throne.
Politically, he should have wanted David gone.
Of course. But instead, he protects David, loves him as his own soul, and puts his own life on the line for the man God anointed. It shows God's sovereignty over even human ambition, bending the heart of a rival to preserve the seed.
And sometimes the intervention was just miraculous. Saul throwing a javelin at him more than once.
And the incident at Naioth and Ramah, Saul sends messengers to capture David, but the Spirit of God comes upon them and they start prophesying.
And it happens to group after group of messengers.
Until Saul goes himself, and the same thing happens to him, he lies down prophesying for a whole day and night. God was neutralizing every weapon, every plot, even the mental state of David's enemies.
We also see this preservation in the most unlikely of places among the Philistines.
I mean, he'd killed their champion, yet he was kept safe in their land, twice.
The first time he has to pretend to be insane.
Drooling on his beard, scratching on the doors, just so they'll dismiss him as harmless. It shows that God's protection was absolute no matter how hostile the territory was.
And then you have those years in the wilderness, being hunted by Saul.
Those moments are unforgettable. In the cave at En Gedi, David has a perfect opportunity to kill Saul.
But he spares him. He just cuts off a piece of his robe.
And that act of mercy, of restraint, it says so much about David's faith. He was relying on God's timing, not his own.
And David clearly understood the significance of all these narrow escapes.
Oh, absolutely. The Psalms are filled with it. You can hear him reflecting on this period over and over. He knew that every near miss, every sudden turn of events was direct divine interference. He sings about the great salvation that kept him safe, confirming this preservation was meticulous and rooted in the covenant.
So David is preserved, the physical line is secure. The next logical step, then, for providence, is to formalize the entire structure around him.
Yes.
Which brings us to the fifth covenant and the holy city.
Once the person of the king was secure, God moved to secure the constitution of the kingdom. We've seen 4 previous solemn establishments of the covenant of grace.
With Adam, Noah, the patriarchs.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And then Moses.
This is the 5th. And it's renewed specifically with David.
It happens when David says he wants to build a permanent house for God, a temple.
Right. He feels uncomfortable living in a house of cedar while the Ark of the Covenant is still in a tent.
And God's response, through the prophet Nathan, is one of the most significant messianic prophecies in the whole Old Testament.
It is. David offers to build God a house, a physical temple. But God says, no, I'm going to build you a house, a dynasty, and a kingdom.
And the promise is just staggering. Thy house and thy kingdom shall be established forever. Thy throne shall be established forever.
And that just can't be talking about Solomon or the earthly kings of Judah. That kingdom vanished centuries ago.
So it has to be fulfilled in Christ.
Entirely. It's a promise that secured the future spiritual foundation of the church.
And David himself, the sources say, he understood the incredible weight of this.
He did, immediately. He understood that this covenant promise was greater than any other blessing. In his very last words, he calls it, all my salvation and all my desire. It became the central hope for the future kingdom.
And this is what the later prophets keep referring back to. Isaiah talks about the sure mercies of David.
Those sure mercies are the guarantee of an everlasting kingdom and an everlasting king. By coming to Christ, the true Son of David, we get an interest in the benefits of that eternally established covenant.
So while God is establishing the spiritual throne, he's also establishing the physical location for worship, Jerusalem.
Which is a huge structural change from the law of Moses.
How so?
The law of Moses kept saying that sacrifices should be brought to the place he would choose, but it never actually named the place.
The tabernacle was movable.
It reflected the temporary wandering state of the people, but choosing Jerusalem as a fixed point signaled a new level of establishment and rest.
But first, David had to conquer it.
The Jebusites still held the stronghold of Zion. It was a task that Joshua, for all his success, hadn't fully completed. So David, the captain, had to redeem that city to make it God's holy city.
Which makes Jerusalem itself a great type of the church.
It does. Redeemed by Christ, the captain of our salvation, from the control of spiritual enemies, the devils, who are typified by those Jebusites.
And its future role was locked in from that moment.
Absolutely. It was appointed as the place for the first gathering of the Christian church after the resurrection. It's where the Spirit was poured out at Pentecost and where the gospel started to go out to the world, just as Isaiah prophesied.
So the location is fixed, the covenant is secure, and then David also delivers on the physical promise about the land itself.
This is a point that's often overlooked, but it's crucial. Joshua started the work of possessing the land, but he left a lot unfinished.
There were still Canaanite remnants.
The Jebusites, the Philistines, others. David completed the task. He subjected all the nations of Canaan to Israelite rule.
But he did more than that, didn't he? He extended the borders.
He did. He pushed them out to the full maximum limits that were promised to Abraham way back in Genesis. That massive area stretching from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates.
So Joshua's possession was partial, but David's was complete.
It was. And that full dominion under David and Solomon, it must have been an incredible visual for the people. It gave them a tangible, even if temporary, picture of the massive, universal scope of Christ's spiritual kingdom.
So when the psalmist writes about the Messiah's dominion being from sea to sea, they had a real historical image in their minds.
They did. The temporary fulfillment prepared them to grasp the scale of the eternal one.
Okay, so the place is fixed, the land is subdued. Now, the internal life of the church, its worship, that also has to be refined and fixed to prepare for the temple.
Right, and this is where we see the perfection of worship and the rise of the temple.
This just underscores David's unique position. He's not just the personal type of Christ who finishes Joshua's work.
He also perfects the instituted worship that Moses began.
He didn't just maintain the Mosaic system, he added to it.
Yes, and these new institutions were treated as having equal parallel validity with the law of Moses. He organized the Levites into new singers, porters, treasurers. He divided the priests into 24 courses.
And those 24 courses were not just a temporary administrative change.
No, they were enduring ecclesiastical law. They lasted for centuries, all the way until the whole system was abolished. You know, Zacharias, John the Baptist's father, he still belonged to the course of Abijah, one of David's original divisions.
But the change that has the deepest theological meaning is David partially abolishing part of Moses' law.
This is a really critical point. The law of Moses, in Numbers, laid out very specific duties for the Levites about carrying the tabernacle vessels.
And David, by divine revelation, changed that. He abolished those tasks.
He did. And the reason that's so significant is that it provides the theological precedent.
How so?
Well, if David, who is just a type of the Messiah, had the authority from God to set aside a part of the ceremonial law given by Moses,
Then it stands to reason that the Messiah himself, the antitype, could and would abolish the whole system when he came.
Exactly. It proved the ceremonial law was never meant to be perpetual. It was mutable.
And this leads right to the ultimate replacement structure, the temple. David sets aside Moses' movable tabernacle to make way for a fixed, permanent temple.
The tabernacle was a tent for a people on the move. The temple was a magnificent fixed structure for a people at rest in the Promised Land. And this replacement foreshadowed Christ, the Son of David, abolishing the movable, temporary Jewish constitution to set up the spiritual gospel temple.
Which is far more glorious and lasts forever. And the design for this temple wasn't just left to human creativity.
No, David received the pattern for it by the Spirit. Just like Moses received the pattern for the tabernacle on Sinai. He had all the plans and passed them to Solomon to execute.
So the temple itself was a precise God-given type.
It was a type of three things. First, of Christ's human nature, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.
Second, of the church.
The habitation of God through the Spirit. And third, it was a type of heaven in its glorified state, the ultimate dwelling place of God. It was the physical place where God dwelt on earth until Christ came to dwell in human nature.
And the high point of all this external visible glory was reached during Solomon's reign. The sources call this the full moon stage of the Jewish church.
Yes, we've seen the light of redemption getting brighter and brighter since Abraham. Now, halfway between Abraham and Christ, the external church was at its absolute peak. The kingdom was established in the right family. They had the full promised land. They were at peace.
And the prosperity was legendary. Silver was as stones.
It was. And this happy, prosperous state was deeply symbolic. David, the man of war and suffering, he typified Christ in humiliation.
While Solomon, the man of peace, shadowed Christ exalted and reigning.
And that earthly peace gave them a vivid type of two greater realities. First, the glorious latter ages of the church on earth, the days of peace that are prophesied.
And second, the heavenly Canaan.
The ultimate rest and peace that awaits the church after all the conflicts are over.
It's a powerful peak. But what happens right after is the great paradox of this whole era. It's followed not by more glory, but by a gradual, deliberate decline.
It is.
Which brings us to decline, preservation of the line, and the prophets.
After Solomon, the visible glory of the Jewish church starts to wane, like the moon heading toward conjunction with the sun. Solomon's idolatry, the kingdom splitting in two, the massive loss of life in civil wars.
There's an immediate and staggering reduction in the strength of the nation. But this decline wasn't just a random tragedy.
No, it was a managed preparation. This gradual diminishing of the external glory served some crucial purposes, all aimed at preparing the ground for the superior spiritual glory of the gospel.
Okay, so what was the first purpose?
It was simply to make way for the spiritual dispensation itself. The legal dispensation, even at its most opulent under Solomon, was still an inferior glory compared to Christ's. Paul calls the Old Testament pomp weak and beggarly elements.
So that glory had to fade.
It did. It's like the stars disappearing when the sun rises. God didn't want the people to be so dazzled by the external show that they'd refuse to exchange it for the spiritual glory of a despised Jesus.
He had to dim the lights on the Old Testament stage so the New Testament spotlight would be effective.
That's a good way of thinking about it. The second purpose was to prevent human pride. The decline weakened the Jewish state, so they couldn't boast in their own strength when salvation finally came.
The analogy of Gideon's army comes to mind.
It's a perfect parallel. God told Gideon his army was too large so Israel wouldn't say, "My own hand has saved me," he whittled them down to just 300 men.
And God did the same with Israel.
He did. He let the kingdom split. He allowed the captivity, so that when Christ came and conquered the world with a tiny band of despised disciples, the victory would be seen as God's work alone, achieved by spiritual means.
And the third purpose.
The low state of the Jewish church at Christ's coming just made their salvation more visible. They were rescued not just from spiritual corruption, but also from temporal bondage under the Romans. Their redemption felt so much greater because their starting point was so desperately low.
So amidst all this external decay, God maintained this laser focus on one specific thing: preserving the kingly line in Judah.
This is the historical miracle of the period. The crown of the northern 10 tribes was constantly changing hands. Assassinations, coups, 9 different dynasties.
But the crown of Judah.
The southern kingdom, where the true religion was upheld, it was kept in David's family, almost without interruption, right down the direct legal line Matthew gives for Christ's genealogy.
That stability, compared to the chaos in the north, is just undeniable proof of providence keeping the covenant.
And this was true even when the kings of Judah were incredibly wicked. Ahaz, Manasseh, God didn't take the crown away. And the reason is given explicitly. He remembered the everlasting covenant with David.
For David's sake.
Yes. For David's sake, he kept a lamp burning in Jerusalem. The faithfulness of the covenant was guaranteed, regardless of the faithlessness of the current king.
And we see this providence at work right after David's death, when Adonijah tries to seize the throne.
And his whole conspiracy just evaporates. Providence works suddenly to establish Solomon, the legal covenanted ancestor.
But the biggest threat to the line came during the reign of wicked King Ahaz.
It did. This was a crisis. The kings of Syria and Israel conspired not just to defeat Judah, but to depose Ahaz and install a non-Davidic ruler, the son of Tabeel.
If they had succeeded, the line would have been broken.
Forever, Ahaz and the people were terrified. And this fear is what prompts one of the most famous prophecies of all.
The sign of Emmanuel.
God sends Isaiah to Ahaz to tell him the plan will fail, and gives him the sign in Isaiah chapter 7. "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel."
And that promise did two things at once.
It did. It guaranteed the future Redeemer, but it also assured the terrified king in the present. It was a confirmation that the house of David could not be destroyed because the Messiah, Emmanuel, had to come from that specific legal seed. The covenant was an unbreakable shield.
And the physical protection of Judah against these massive armies is just as dramatic. They were always on the brink of being wiped out.
The odds were impossible. You have Shishak of Egypt, Jeroboam's army of 800,000 men, Zerah the Ethiopian with 1,000,000 troops. In every case, the deliverance was miraculous and God's work, not Judah's strength.
And the ultimate example of this has to be Sennacherib,
The head of the Assyrian monarchy. He seemed unstoppable. He had swallowed up everything around Jerusalem, reducing Judah to a single city.
and his general was openly mocking them.
Telling them they were doomed. But God gives Hezekiah a sign. The remnant would take root downward and bear fruit upward. It's this image of the church being cut down, hidden, but guaranteed to revive and flourish again.
And then the angel slays 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp overnight.
A spectacular, undeniable act of sovereignty. It preserved the line and the city of the covenant, keeping the foundation secure for Christ's coming.
And running right alongside this physical preservation of the line was the systematic augmentation of the written prophecy.
The canon just keeps growing, providing more and more clarity about the Redeemer.
The first wave comes under Solomon.
Right. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. And while Proverbs is about wisdom, the Song of Songs is entirely focused on Christ and his church. That union, that love between the Redeemer and the redeemed.
That alone gave a whole new level of intimate spiritual insight.
It did. But the real explosion in prophecy starts around Uzziah's time, when God raises up this new class of writing prophets: Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, Micah.
Before this, prophets like Samuel and Nathan were mostly writing history.
Now the focus shifts almost entirely to prophecy itself. And this is a monumental advance because the main business of these prophets was to give specific, focused, and greatly increased testimony to Jesus Christ.
The light of the gospel just got exceedingly brighter.
It did. They were preparing the way by showing the glory that would follow Christ's suffering. And no one did that with more clarity than Isaiah, the evangelical prophet.
Hall says Isaiah was very bold.
Meaning he was very plain, very explicit in his speech about redemption. Think about Isaiah 53.
It's stunningly accurate.
It's not vague imagery. It describes the substitutionary suffering, the sacrifice, the burial, the benefits of Christ, almost as plainly as the New Testament does. He was wounded for our transgressions. With his stripes we are healed. That is the language of substitutionary atonement, written centuries before the fact.
And Isaiah saw Christ in a vision, which John's gospel confirms.
So this era committed this immense treasure of specific detail to the church. It provided comfort for the people then, and confirmation for all the ages to come.
And we can't overlook the care that was taken to preserve the foundation of all of this, the law of Moses itself.
Right. During that terrible apostasy under Manasseh and Amon, when idolatry was rampant, the book of the law was actually lost.
Lost inside the temple.
Buried in the rubbish from decades of neglect.
And it's only rediscovered during Josiah's repairs.
And when it's found, it sparks an immediate dramatic revival. Josiah hears the words, he rents his clothes, he realizes how far they've fallen. It shows that even in the deepest spiritual darkness, God sovereignly protected the written word.
It seems like that highlights the main principle of this whole era. Even as the visible church was sinking toward captivity, God was protecting the necessary components, the written word and the ancestral line.
He was. The entire period is a study in purposeful decline paired with structural establishment. The temporary structures were allowed to decay, while the eternal ones were meticulously reinforced.
So if we pull all this together, the period from David to the captivity was less about steady growth and more about strategic, even difficult, structural establishment, all happening amidst external decay.
Exactly. We saw the everlasting covenant secured in David's line, the place of worship fixed in Jerusalem, the land promise completely fulfilled to set a type of Christ's kingdom, the system of worship refined, and the written word dramatically expanded.
All of this was necessary preparation for the spiritual kingdom of Christ. And that external decay of the Jewish state, that waning of the moon, it wasn't a failure.
Not at all. It was a deliberate act of providence to make sure that when the full glory of Christ arrived, it would be seen as infinitely superior to all the temporary, earthly pomp it replaced.
The entire Mosaic system, even at its peak under Solomon, was designed to decline to welcome Christ's spiritual authority.
It teaches us that God frequently removes the temporary scaffolding to reveal the finished, eternal building.
And that deliberate pattern of letting things fade, it raises a thought for us to consider, looking at the church today. We've seen God allowing the external glory of the Old Covenant, its centralized power, its physical kingdom, its temple, to fade away to prepare for something better, something purely spiritual.
It does make you wonder. What systems, what institutions, or what forms of glory within the visible church today, structures that might seem magnificent to us, what might God be diminishing or allowing to fade?
In order to prepare his people for a clearer, more direct apprehension of the glory of the Redeemer alone.
Dissolving the types to reveal the antitype. It suggests that sometimes true fidelity to the covenant might mean accepting the loss of external glory.
That's the ultimate lesson of this period. We have to constantly consider what we're clinging to versus what God is actively moving us toward.
Which is always and only the fullness of Christ.
A truly compelling note to end on. Thank you for walking us through this essential period in such detail.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Reformed Thinking. We'll see you for the next deep dive.